We were all waiting for the cruelty. On a busy street, a man in a tailored suit stood over a starving mother begging on the pavement. We'd all seen this story before, and we were bracing for the inevitable, casual humiliation. But what if I told you that everything you assume about people is wrong? I was there when a moment of expected shame turned into an act so powerful, it changed everyone who saw it. And the stunning secret behind it is something you will never see coming. The air in Harare that afternoon was thick, a heavy blanket smelling of the coming rain and the sweet, smoky scent of roasting maize from a vendor working diligently on the corner. It's a city that moves to a frantic, chaotic rhythm, a place where the very atmosphere seems to vibrate with desperate, unyielding energy. Minibus taxis, or combis, as they are affectionately and fearfully known, scream through the congested streets, each one a moving canvas of vibrant, peeling paint and slogans promising salvation or speed. They weave through congested traffic with a terrifying disregard for the laws of physics, their worn-out brakes and overworked engines adding to the constant, blaring symphony of urban life. People rushed everywhere, their shoulders hunched and their faces etched with a familiar mixture of fierce determination and bone-deep exhaustion. A universal mask worn by those engaged in the daily grind of survival, in a city of relentless energy and perpetual motion. Every sidewalk was a turbulent river of humanity, each person an individual current carried along by their own urgent purpose, their private struggles and triumphs hidden behind a veneer of forward momentum. This city is a living, breathing tapestry of the most wild and jarring contrasts imaginable, a place where obscene wealth and abject poverty exist in such close proximity that they practically breathe the same air, often separated by nothing more than a meticulously polished pane of glass. Gleaming, imported SUVs, the kind that cost more than a family home and guzzle fuel with unapologetic thirst, would carelessly splash muddy water from the cavernous potholes onto the tired legs of people waiting with saint-like patience for a bus that might never arrive. And right there, at the very epicenter of this stark and uncomfortable contrast, positioned just outside the shiny, imposing glass doors of the Orchid, one of the most exclusive and punishingly expensive restaurants in the entire country, sat a woman who the world, in its hurried indifference, was try its very best to render completely and utterly invisible. She was a ghost in the machine, a silent testament to the city's broken promises. Her name, I would later learn, was Rudo. She was huddled on the hard, unforgiving pavement, her entire posture silent, desperate apology for her own existence as she tried to make herself as small and unnoticeable as humanly possible, folding into herself to occupy the barest minimum of space. A faded, threadbare wrap, once perhaps a vibrant pattern but now worn to a muted shadow of its former self, was pulled tightly around her painfully thin shoulders. Strapped to her back, nestled in a cocoon of worn fabric, a small child, Toriro, was coughing softly in a restless, feverish sleep, her small body stirring with discomfort. Rudo wasn't just holding out a hand for the clink of spare change. She was begging for leftovers from a fine dining establishment, her voice a fragile, hoarse whisper that you could barely hear above the city's relentless din, a sound as thin and delicate as a spider's thread. "Please," she murmured to the endless stream of legs and expensive shoes passing by. "Anything for my child?" I watched, frozen in place, as person after person walked right past her, their eyes fixed forward, their pace never faltering, deliberately avoiding any glance or eye contact that might acknowledge her presence and, by extension, their own shared humanity. A group of young women, dressed in bright, fashionable dresses that screamed of leisure and privilege, laughing about some private joke that filled the air around them with carefree joy, swept into the restaurant without a single look down at the woman crumpled at their feet. It was a casual, thoughtless cruelty, an act of erasure performed without malice, but with devastating effect. With each person who ignored her, another invisible line of quiet, soul-crushing despair seemed to be etched onto Rudo's face. She became a little more invisible, a little more hopeless, a little less human with every passing, indifferent moment. What those who ignored her might not have realized was a profound and terrifying risk she was taking simply by being there, by daring to make her suffering public. In Zimbabwe, the social and legal landscape can be precarious and unforgiving for the desperate. It is often considered an offense for an adult to beg, while accompanied by a child, a measure ostensibly intended to prevent exploitation, but one that in practice can cruelly punish the most vulnerable. She was not merely enduring the deep, burning shame of her situation. She was actively risking arrest, prosecution, and the unimaginable horror of being separated from her child, all for the slim, desperate chance to secure their next meal. My own feet felt as though they were glued to the sidewalk, paralyzed by a familiar, sickening pang of guilt. The profound shame of just standing there, another silent, complicit spectator to her suffering. And then, a black Mercedes pulled up to the curb, so sleek and impossibly shiny it seemed to vacuum all the light, sound, and attention on the street toward itself, its presence a declaration of power. Out of the driver's side of the Mercedes stepped a man who radiated a quiet but immense authority, an aura of importance that was as tangible as the expensive fabric of his clothes. He was tall and imposing, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that spoke of international boardrooms, high-stakes negotiations, and a life lived far from the grit of the city streets. His shoes were polished to a perfect mirror shine, so pristine that they reflected the cracked and dirty sidewalk beneath them, a stark juxtaposition of his world and the one he was now walking through. This was Mr. Moyo. Without a single word, he handed a supple leather briefcase to his driver and began his short, purposeful walk towards the grand entrance of the restaurant, his path clearly set. But then, just as he was about to breach the threshold and disappear into the world of luxury, he stopped dead in his tracks. He had seen her. Rudo flinched physically as his sharp, assessing eyes landed on her, a visible tremor running through her small frame. It was as if his gaze had a physical weight, a pressure that she could feel pressing down on her. She instinctively tried to shrink even further into the cold, hard concrete, pulling the sleeping Torero closer to her body as if to shield her child not from a blow, but from the simple, devastating force of this powerful man's attention. In that instant, a strange and sudden hush fell over our little patch of the sidewalk, a pocket of intense silence in the heart of the noisy city. The maize vendor paused his work, his hand hovering over the glowing coals. The chaotic, frantic rhythm of the street seemed to fade into a muted background hum. We were all watching, holding our collective breath, absolutely and cynically certain that we knew what was coming next. This was a scene we had all mentally rehearsed 1,000 times, a grimly familiar play in the theater of the street. We anticipated the loud, public lecture on personal responsibility, the angry, indignant yelling about getting a job, the cold and dismissive demand for her to get her filth away from the pristine entrance of his expensive restaurant. We were ready for the humiliation, for the casual assertion of power that would put her firmly back in her place. Mr. Moyo took 2 long, deliberate steps and stood directly over her, casting a long and imposing shadow that swallowed her and her child whole, erasing them from the afternoon sun. His voice wasn't the furious yell we expected, but it was sharp, precise, and it cut to the tense air with undeniable and chilling authority. "What are you doing here?" he asked. The question hung there, cold and heavy with unspoken judgment, an accusation disguised as an inquiry. The question was a clear accusation, and Rudo couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze, her eyes fixed on the impossible perfection of his expensive shoes. Her shoulders trembled with a volatile mixture of profound fear and utter exhaustion, her body seemingly on the verge of collapsing under the weight of his scrutiny. "Sir," she stammered, her voice so small and broken it was almost carried away by the breeze. "My child, she is hungry. We haven't eaten since yesterday." The raw, simple, unadorned truth of her words filled the space between them with a terrible intimacy. I could feel the judgment in the air, not just from him toward her, but from all of us towards him, for proving our worst and most cynical assumptions about the world correct. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wanted to step in, to say something, to break the spell, but like everyone else, I was frozen in place by the sheer social gravity of the moment. Then Mr. Moyo did something utterly and profoundly unexpected, something that shattered the script we had all written for him. He crouched down, a slow, deliberate movement that brought him closer to her eye level, the fine, expensive fabric of his suit trousers brushing against the dirt and grime of the pavement without a hint of hesitation. His face remained stern, his expression completely unreadable, but the act itself was a significant crack in the impenetrable armor of his authority. "This is a place of business," he said, his voice now low and confidential, almost a whisper, as if sharing a crucial secret with her alone. "You can't beg here." And there it was, the verbal confirmation we were all waiting for. The humiliation was beginning. Rudo finally looked up, her eyes swimming with unshed tears of shame and resignation. She opened her mouth to apologize, to promise she would leave immediately, but he spoke again before she could get a single word out, and his next words would change everything. "You can't beg here," he repeated, but his tone had fundamentally shifted. The change so pronounced it was almost shocking. It had softened just enough for the transformation to be unmistakable, losing its hard, cutting edge and taking on an unusual quality of gentle, yet firm insistence. "Because the best food," he continued, his gaze shifting from her weary, tear-streaked face to the sleeping child on her back, "is inside." The words landed in the silent, supercharged air, and a palpable wave of confusion and disbelief rippled through the assembled onlookers. He then asked, his voice now quiet and deeply personal, stripped of all its earlier judgment, "What is your daughter's name?" Startled by the sudden, dizzying change from accusation to gentle inquiry, Rudo could only whisper the name, Toriro. "Toriro," Mr. Moyo repeated softly, and the name sounded strangely familiar on his tongue, as if he were reacquainting himself with a long-lost and cherished word. "It means hope," he said, more to himself than to her, a quiet realization dawning in his own eyes. He paused, and for a fleeting, completely unguarded second, a profound and powerful emotion flickered across his stern face, a deep and resonant pain, a memory surfacing from a place he kept carefully locked and hidden from the world. He held her gaze, and in that shared moment of stillness, the formidable wall between the wealthy man and the destitute woman completely dissolved. "A long time ago," he confessed to her, and by extension to the silent, watching street. "My mother and I were on a street just like this one. We were hungry. We had nothing." The confession silenced everything. The city noise, the relentless traffic, the internal judgments of the crowd, it all vanished, replaced by a profound and sacred stillness. This was not the script any of us had written in our heads. The man of immense wealth was not the one-dimensional villain of our assumptions. He was a survivor, a man whose present was built upon a past he had just revealed to a complete stranger. Mr. Moyo slowly straightened up to his full height, his tall frame now seeming not intimidating, but powerfully protective. He turned to the stunned doorman, who had been watching the entire, unbelievable exchange with wide-eyed disbelief, his professional composure completely shattered. "Is table 7 ready?" Mr. Moyo asked calmly, his voice steady. "Yes, Mr. Moyo." "Of course, sir," the doorman stammered, his mind visibly struggling to catch up with reality. Mr. Moyo turned his attention back to Rudo, who was still kneeling on the cold pavement, looking up at him as if he were an apparition, a figment of her desperate imagination. "That table is for you," he said gently, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to push back the city's chill, a warmth that promised comfort and safety. And then he did something that I will never forget for as long as I live, a gesture so simple and yet so profound it felt monumental. He took off his expensive, perfectly fitted suit jacket and, bending down slightly, he draped it over her thin shoulders, carefully covering both her and the sleeping child on her back in its warmth and weight. "It's warm inside," he said simply, the words imbued with a much deeper meaning. "Please be my guest." He offered her his hand. For a long, silent moment, Rudo just stared at it. A strong, clean, well-manicured hand extended into her world of dirt, hunger, and desperation. She seemed utterly unable to process that the moment was real, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning wonder. Then, slowly, hesitantly, she placed her own trembling, calloused hand in his. He grasped it firmly and helped her to her feet with a grace that was profoundly moving and deeply dignified. He then led her, this forgotten woman and her sleeping child, now wrapped in the literal and figurative armor of his own success, straight to the grand front doors of the fanciest restaurant in town. The stunning secret wasn't just his random act of kindness. The secret, the true, mind-bending power of the moment, was that he owned the restaurant. He wasn't just giving her a meal, he was reaching back into his own painful past and rewriting its ending. I stood there on the pavement with the rest of the silent, astonished crowd as they disappeared inside, the glass doors closing softly behind them. The spell of tense, collective silence was instantly broken, erupting into a wave of hushed, incredulous whispers and murmurs. A palpable sense of communal shock, mingled with quiet but powerful and pervasive shame, rippled through those of us who had just stood by and done absolutely nothing. The very same people who had walked right past her only minutes before, their eyes averted and their jaws set in indifference, were now looking at the ground, at their own shoes, unable to meet anyone's gaze. I was one of them, my earlier paralysis now transformed into a deep, humbling, and uncomfortable sense of my own failure to act, to see, to connect. Through the large, pristine glass window of the restaurant, I saw the next chapter of this unbelievable story unfold in the opulent interior. The wealthy diners, mid-conversation and mid-bite, fell silent one by one, their forks and knives hovering over their plates as they stared, dumbfounded, as Mr. Moyo, the owner of their exclusive club, personally led this woman from the street to a pristine table set with starched white tablecloth and an array of gleaming silverware. He didn't just abandon her there to face the intense, judgmental scrutiny of the room alone. Instead, he pulled out her chair with the same fluid courtesy he would offer any visiting dignitary, spoke quietly and reassuringly to the waiter who rushed over with a panicked look on his face, and then, to the absolute and utter shock of everyone, he sat down with her. He wasn't treating her as a charity case to be quickly dealt with and forgotten. He was treating her as an honored guest, a respected equal. In Zimbabwean culture, as in many others around the world, the act of sharing a meal is a profound and deeply meaningful symbol of community, acceptance, and friendship. It is an act that communicates a powerful message without words. You are one of us. You belong here. By sitting with her at that table, in full view of his wealthy clientele, he was not just giving her food. He was publicly and unequivocally restoring the dignity that the world and all of us in it had tried so hard to strip from her. He was erasing her invisibility and making her, for this moment, the most important person in the entire room. Soon the waiter, now composed and professional, brought out plates of steaming sadza, a rich, fragrant beef stew, warm bread, and a tall, cool bottle of fresh milk for Toriro, who was now awake and looking around the opulent room with wide, curious, and unafraid eyes. Mr. Moyo didn't sit in awkward silence. He spoke with Rudo, leaning in, asking her questions, and listening, truly, actively listening, to her quiet, hesitant answers. From my vantage point on the other side of the glass, I could literally see her posture change in real time. She began to sit up straighter, the crushing weight of shame and despair that had been hunched on her shoulders seeming to physically lift. The deep-seated fear in her eyes was slowly replaced by a flicker of light, a spark of cautious trust, and then, for the first time since I had seen her, she smiled. He didn't just give her a fleeting moment of comfort or a single warm meal. He offered her a permanent way out of the darkness. Before she and Toriro left the restaurant that evening, he offered her a job. It was a simple, respectable position cleaning the restaurant's office and making tea for the administrative staff, but it came with something far more valuable than a salary: a safe, clean place to stay at the staff quarters, a secure home for her and her daughter. It was not a handout designed to make him feel better about his own wealth for an evening. It was a hand up, a genuine, life-altering opportunity for her to rebuild her life on a foundation of stability, security, and renewed dignity. It was a chance for Hope to finally have a home. As I finally turned and walked home, the city itself felt different. The air no longer seemed so thick with indifference. That single, unexpected act of radical kindness seemed to have changed the very atmosphere on the street, leaving behind a lingering sense of possibility. It's so easy to look at the world and see only the simple, harsh categories we invent. The rich man and the poor woman, the successes and the failures, the powerful and the invisible. We write entire stories in our heads for people we pass by every day, casting them in roles without their permission. But what that day taught me is that every single person is living a complex, profound story that we know absolutely nothing about. Mr. Moyo wasn't just a rich man in a suit. He was once a hungry boy on a desperate street. Rudo wasn't just a beggar on the pavement. She was a mother, filled with a powerful hope for her child. This isn't just a simple reminder to be kind. It's a much deeper challenge. A challenge to see beyond the surface, to reject our lazy assumptions, to pause, and to make an honest effort to understand. Because true wealth isn't measured by what you have accumulated in your bank account, but by what you are willing to give from the depths of your heart. It is measured by your capacity to see the humanity in others and to act on it. Sometimes the most powerful and transformative gift in the entire world is simply to be seen. If this story touched you, please share it. And tell us in the comments below, what is the kindest thing you've ever witnessed?